Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Israel's Death Penalty Expansion Law, a legal analysis and a Catholic call to protect Palestinian life. This is an initiative of Adalah, the Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel, with Pax Christi International, Global Catholic Peace Movement. The legislative changes enacted by Israel in 2026 regarding the death penalty represent a formal codification of legal apartheid, creating a two-tiered justice system that applies capital punishment exclusively to Palestinians while granting immunity to Israeli settlers. The death penalty is not merely a criminal matter. It is a direct challenge to our understanding of human dignity and the right of life. While historically justified under the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, we now know that this view ignores the complexity of the justice system and the intrinsic value of every person, even those who have committed serious crimes. As it was said in the statement in which Catholic leaders and organizations called to protect Palestinian life under occupation in response to Israel's death penalty expansion bill, quotations, the legislation represents a deeply troubling and historic shift. By introducing and normalizing the death penalty within military courts operating in occupied territory, it institutionalizes a system of state-sanctioned killing on discriminatory grounds. The fact that Israeli citizens are excluded from these provisions highlights the inequity and discrimination inherent in this law. In the context of ongoing allegations of genocide, if intent is proven, a law designed specifically to target specifically Palestinians could constitute an act of genocide, being a part of a wider pattern of genocidal conduct in violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Close quotations. The core ethical mandate of Christianity is love your neighbor as yourself, as it is stated in Mark 12. Jesus expanded this definition to include even those perceived as enemies or outsiders. The dual-track justice system dehumanizes Palestinians, treating their lives as disposable while protecting Jewish citizens, especially settlers. This racial and religious discrimination contradicts Galatians 3:28, which declares there is neither Jew nor Greek in Christ. Faith demands recognizing the divine image, imago Dei, in every person, regardless of nationality or religion. From a Christian perspective, accepting this legal framework is fundamentally incompatible with the teachings of Jesus Christ. As followers of Jesus, we cannot remain silent in the face of institutionalized inequality. We are called to be agents of reconciliation, not instruments of division. Accepting this law would mean complicity in a system that values some lives over others, a stance antithetical to the cross, where Christ died for all humanity indiscriminately. Our faith compels us to advocate for a justice system rooted in dignity, equality, and restorative peace, rather than fear and retribution. Today, we will hear faith leaders reflecting on this matter and also experts. Thanks to His Eminence, Monsignor Michel Sabah, Latin Patriarch Emeritus of Jerusalem, Dr. Suhad Bishara, Adalah's Legal Director, and to all faith leaders who has accepted our invitation to reflect on this important matter. Pax Christi International invites people of faith to continue rejecting this legislation and to speak up and to act for just peace in the Holy Land. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Again, you hear me?
Michel Sabah, one second only. I will do the introduction. Thank you, Martinez Romero. I will introduce you also as well because you started before everyone, and we give you a short also intro on who you are. Martinez Romero is a Colombia priest practitioner and has served as Secretary General of Pax Christi International since 2023. And she spent 14 years leading the organization's Latin America and Caribbean program on peace building, advocacy, and nonviolent action. And previously, she managed development, humanitarian, and peace programs for Oxfam Great Britain and Catholic Relief Services, and has advised Caritas Internationalis and partners worldwide on faith-based advocacy since 2010. Thank you very much, and we will see you later for the concluding part. Now, I will just give you my welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone that is connecting today. I know you are connected from different sides of the world, so we are trying to welcome you all depending on your time zone. And thank you for joining us at this webinar. I'm Giulia Bordin. I'm the Advocacy Officer for Pax Christi International, and I will be moderating today's session. We are very grateful to have you with us today. We try to bring together today legal expertise, but also Catholic moral reflection. So it's a very nice combination, and it's actually a very interesting one. But our goal today is to better understand the implication of the recently approved legislation that expands the use of the death penalty, and to examine it through the lenses of international law and also of the Catholic social teaching. And we want also to take this opportunity to really reflect on what this moment is asking us to do for peace, for justice, and especially for the Palestinian people. Today's webinar builds actually on an initiative that we launched a few months ago when this law was still a bill. And we launched a call to Catholic leaders worldwide to stay united and to respond to this situation. And we got actually a very nice feedback from all of you from worldwide, and we continue this effort. So this webinar builds up on this, but is not an ending point. It's actually an adding point on the whole campaigning action. And we continue also together with Adalah, and this webinar opportunity is also a co-hosting opportunity. So I'm also very grateful to have the opportunity to work with the Adalah's team and to have them here today. Before we begin, I will give you a few practical notes. So the chat now is open. As you could see, you have the availability now to write who you are, where you come from, maybe share a few greetings of welcome. And after this, once the panel will start, so with the first speaker, the chat will be closed and you will be able to address your questions via the Q&A box that you find the button at the bottom of your screen. We will try to address every question after Dr. Suhad Bishara presentation, but of course we will be mindful of time, so we might not be able to address them all during the webinar. I also kindly ask you to be kind and respectful in the way that you ask your questions and to use a coherent language within the webinar. Any inappropriate language will be, of course, eliminated, so we will not consider any message or question that has violent communication included. The chat will then be open again at the end if you wish to share a few greetings and a few words with all of us. And now we have the honor to actually hearing the opening reflection of His Beatitude Michel Sabah. Michel Sabah is the Latin Patriarch Emeritus of Jerusalem and former president of Pax Christi International. He is the first Palestinian to serve as Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem in modern times and has dedicated his ministry to promoting justice, peace, nonviolence, and dialogue in the Holy Land. And through his leadership in the church and the peace movement, he continues to be a respected advocate for human dignity, reconciliation, and a just peace for all peoples in the region. Your Beatitude, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. The law of death penalty was adopted by Israel in March 2026. It says it is applicable in certain terrorism-related cases, which means that it will apply exclusively to Palestinians. They say also it will be a deterrence to Palestinian violence. Every country, Israel as well, has the right to defend its citizens from all violence. But security in Israel derives from a political conflict. So it is a question of justice in this conflict for Israel and for the Palestinian people. Justice for Israel is to exist in security without fear of any Palestinian violence. It is the same for the Palestinians. Justice is to exist and live without fear of any Israeli violence. The definition of the conflict between both Israel and Palestinians is as follows. The Palestinians exist and live in their own land, towns, and villages and homes since generations. Israel today says to the Palestinians living in their own land and homes, you have not the right to exist here. The Palestinians say, we are in our land and we will stay here. This is what generates insecurity for Israel, the fear from Palestinians who resist to injustice imposed upon them by Israel. Israel has the right to live in security, but the way to security for Israel is not a new law of death penalty. Death penalty was indeed already applied without a special law on the Palestinians in military attacks by targeted killing and assassinations, and by what we saw and still see in Gaza and all over the West Bank. The Israelis use many ways of violence to protect their security, forgetting that their violence, instead of giving them security, are cause for more violence. So Israel does not need a new law to punish or to deter Palestinians who want simply to stay in their own land. Israel needs security, it is right, but the best way is clear and easy. Justice to the Palestinian people. The protection of Israel is not war with the Palestinians, is not a new law of death penalty. It is a true, definitive peace, just peace with the Palestinians. A just peace and security for both. The law of death penalty, applicable as deterrence to Palestinian violence, is another unjust violence and inefficient. To uproot Palestinian violence, to live in security for Israel, a just peace with the Palestinians is the only way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Beatitude for your reflection is really granting us for this beginning of the webinar. And we are grateful to have you always your voice in our gatherings, in our sharing, because it's is a light for us. It's as a sort of a light for really giving us a direction in everything we do. So very grateful, and we hope that you can stay for the whole duration of the webinar with all of us. Thank you again. And now I will welcome Dr. Suhad Bishara. I will give an introduction of who you are before giving you the floor. Dr. Suhad Bishara serves as Adalah Legal Director and has worked with Adalah since 2001. She has about 25 years of experience litigating cases before the Israeli Supreme Court, as served as lead counsel in major human rights cases concerning Palestinian citizens of Israel, as well as cases involving international humanitarian law and Palestinians in the 1967 occupied territory before the Israeli Supreme Court. Suhad is leading a petition filed by Adalah together with numerous Israeli human rights organizations and Palestinian members of the Israeli Knesset challenging the death penalty law. And this is why we have you with us today to give a more in-depth analysis and presentation of the whole situation, but as well giving us probably a few direction on how we can actually get more engaged in the process. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to have this discussion with such an esteemed and important group. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, wherever you are. So I will basically give an overview of the law and our reflections on the law and put it in a wider context. And I will try to do that within the limited time that I have. First, it is important to know that the initial bills that formulating into the law were proposed at the beginning of 2023 and passed the preliminary hearing in March 2003. And it is important to note that this was part of the coalition agreements between Likud and Jewish Party or Jewish Power Party, Otzma Yehudit, towards the formation of the current government coalition in December 2022. So it is automatically linked to October 7th event, but the formulation of the idea and the intent to propose and enact such a law came much before as part of the coalition agreements of the current government. So basically in a complete negation of the right to life and through the imposition of cruel and inhuman punishment, the law enshrines the death penalty by hanging. It primarily targets Palestinians, and I will explain, both citizens of Israel and residents of the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, of course. It is a framework that imposes execution on an explicitly racial basis. The law which adopts the death penalty for those convicted of intentional causing of death, this is the wording of the law, in the context of terrorism as defined under Israeli law, establishes a clear racial separation. In the West Bank, amendments to the military orders apply exclusively to the Palestinian population. Only Palestinians are tried in the military courts in the West Bank, while the amendment to the Israeli civil law or penal law conditions the death penalty on intentional acts of murder committed, quoting, with the intent to negate the existence of the State of Israel, which basically makes a clear racial divide in most cases, if not all of them. This formulation is specifically designed to exclude Israeli Jewish perpetrators of similar offenses based on ideological basis and to ensure that the law is applied solely against Palestinians. This is why we argue in our petition that we filed to the Supreme Court that the law adopts an apartheid-like approach to the fundamental right to life. Now, the law imposes a near mandatory death penalty subject only to extremely rare exceptions on Palestinians residents of the West Bank, without permitting any meaningful consideration of the circumstances of the offense or the personal circumstances of the defendant. In doing so, the law strips judges of their independence and discretion, rendering the punishment inherently arbitrary. It permits death sentence to be imposed by a simple majority in the military courts, allowing the court to impose the death penalty even where the prosecution has not sought to or consented to it, abolishes the authority of the military commander to mitigate or commute sentences, and eliminates any realistic possibility of pardon. It mandates an exceptionally short time frame of 90 days to carry out the death penalty after a final decision, of course, severely undermining the ability to pursue appeals, retrial, and imposes restrictions on access to legal counsel and family visits during the period awaiting the execution of the death penalty. We are aware, of course, of lack of due process safeguards to guarantee that in the military courts that have a very high percentage of conviction, often investigations entails the use of torture and so on and so on. For the sake of time, I won't get into much details in this regard. It is also important to be aware that the state's purpose of the law, or the stated purpose of the law, is assumably deterrence, which is also very problematic because no facts were presented to substantiate this claim. The majority of Israel's security officials who appeared before the relevant Knesset committee rejected that assertion, and that the death penalty would have an deterrent effect. And this is the case in dozens of criminal law and criminology academic research in many jurisdictions all over the world that say that there is no connection between the death penalty and deterrence, and the imposition of death penalty does not really reduce the percentage of homicide. So the statement made by the law's initiators and proponents throughout the legislation process reveals that its true primary purpose is retribution or revenge rather than deterrence, and we have seen that in many statements before and after the law was enacted. I would also like to emphasize the Knesset's lack of authority to legislate in the West Bank. The law cannot apply, this is at least what we argue in court, and we believe there's a good legal grounds for this. Directly or indirectly, the Knesset cannot enact any laws that apply to Palestinians residing in the West Bank, as they constitute a protected population under occupation, and this is in violation of international humanitarian law, laws of occupation, and even basic principles of international humanitarian law. The Knesset is not the legislator in the West Bank, lacks the authority to impose laws that contradict the interest of the protected population. They are not sovereign in the area. International law and human rights law apply to the Palestinians. And this becomes very problematic. The contention is reinforced by the fact that the law meets the definition of racist apartheid legislation, which is prohibited under customary international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights law, of course. Now, after the law was enacted, there was at least two major developments. One was the amendment to the military orders, basically to implement the law and to impose de facto death penalty in trials in the military courts in the West Bank, which is of course problematic by itself. But examining the amendment to the military order shows more problematic aspects. Of course, it adopts the death penalty law into the military courts and the military order, but the amendment is drafted in a way that aims to impose this death penalty as wide as possible, even wider than the law itself in the relevant cases. The amendment adopts a wider framework to the death penalty compared to the law. It establishes a very vague, broad, and inherently political offenses that does not meet the requirements of certainty and legality demanded as basic principle of criminal law, particularly when the offenses carried a mandatory death penalty. This vague and undefined element that is not grounded in the international humanitarian law seeks to transfer opposition or rejection the authority of the occupying power into the basis for justifying the deprivation of life. Needless to mention that the authority of the military commander in the occupied territory is not an authority to which protected persons owe political or ideological alliance. Under these circumstances, the amendment constitutes a dangerous expansion of criminal liability without clear boundaries. It adopts a very problematic procedural and evidentiary framework. For example, if the killing was done with a knife or a weapon, the assumption is that it is done with the necessary intent under the amendment without troubling even the prosecution in proving it. So you're guilty with the relevant intent that exposes you to death penalty unless you prove otherwise. And usually in criminal law, you're presumed innocent until the prosecution proves otherwise. The same goes if the killing was done by an outlawed organization or a member of such organization. The assumption is that the intent exists without having to prove that by the prosecution, which is very problematic also when we speak in legal terms. More to say when we're speaking about suspects who are facing the death penalty. This, in addition to eliminating many procedural safeguards that are very problematic in the military courts to begin with. Another development in this regard, and we've been asked this so many times, does the law apply to political prisoners, Palestinian political prisoners nowadays being held in Israeli prisons? And the answer is no, because the law does not apply retroactively. However, another law was enacted to establish special military tribunal to indict Palestinians that took part in October 7th attack. It's a law that passed a few weeks ago. We're talking about a special military tribunal, which is very problematic, no safeguards, again, for fair procedures, faced or threatened with death penalty, all defendants under the Israeli law against genocide, which becomes very problematic. This will apply or applies basically on those who are suspected that that participated in a way or another in October 7th events in 2023. So both laws place Israel in direct opposition to the international trend towards abolition and in breach of binding obligations under international law. And it's important also to be aware that under international law and in many countries, the trend for decades now is to abolish death penalty. It's forbidden now in Europe and in many other countries. Even if there are laws that allow for the death penalty, de facto, most countries are abolitionist, meaning that they do not apply the law. And we should certainly read the law in its wider context, as was mentioned, of extrajudicial execution by Israeli security forces, with a long-standing policy of impunity and almost no accountability in this regard, and even support granted to officials to crimes committed by settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank to drive them out of their villages, lands, and homes. So the culture of impunity and no accountability in the context of the killing of security forces, needless to mention, of course, the genocide in Gaza with no accountability. So we perceive the law as sending a very clear message, not just that Palestinian lives don't matter, it goes further to add legal tools to expand the killing of Palestinians, and it becomes a matter of a rule of law, unfortunately. And it's very concerning because it codifies the killing of Palestinians, racially designed as a matter of a rule of law, as I've mentioned, which is taking basically things to the extreme in a manner that makes it harder to challenge it. The law generated, honestly, a lot of international attention. It generated a lot of international pressure, specifically in Europe, human rights organizations, politicians, how somehow it mitigated along the way, also because of many dramatic events that are happening since then. However, the law still exists. We have a petition still pending before the Israeli Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of the law. So this is why we think it is crucial at this stage to continue with international advocacy, generate more pressure in this regard, civil society leaders, religious leaders, to make pressure on local governments. So hopefully this will generate enough pressure to reconsider the law and its applicability under the circumstances. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suhad. Sorry, I was having a problem, a glimpse with the Zoom. Just a reminder for you all that indeed, I know that it's a lot to take in, but you can use the Q&A chat for asking questions. We have already a question pending. Maybe before going to that, I would like to actually ask a question myself. You spoke about the international pressure and, of course, how it resonated with many outside the world, your question, asking in your petition. I would like to ask if internally within the Israeli society, you have a sort of understanding of how this was welcome or unwelcome, if there were some specific reaction to it, and how is right now the situation on that regard?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it depends. Politically speaking, the law passed in the Knesset with a majority. That means that a wide range of the Israeli political spectrum supported it. However, there are who were very vocal against it, and still. There were 3 petitions filed in the Supreme Court on behalf of different civil society and human rights organizations, where the scene there is different. As a human rights organization, there is more outspoken views, of course, against the law, also as a matter of principle, regardless of the racial design of the law, as a matter of principle, as a human rights principle. The death penalty is unjustified and cannot be justified. The right to life is the mother of all rights. And no one has the right, even the authorities, the state authorities, has the right to take that. They can punish people but not kill people as a result, and it's irreversible. Unfortunately, the law passed in a majority, and it was generated, within the fear of October 7th, although it was initiated regardless and much before. But there was this general atmosphere of fear that generated more support, I think, to the law. However, internationally, we are aware of Israeli politicians who even voted to the law, say, okay, now it's pending before the Supreme Court. Let's see what the Supreme Court would decide as kind of mitigating some kind of the international pressure that generated against the law back then. But this is not enough. As I've said, I think everyone who can do anything to generate international pressure in this regard, it's becoming more and more crucial. It's only a matter of time that the law will start being implemented, which would be catastrophic, even if it's one or two cases. It's taking people's life unjustifiably under any human rights principles.
Thank you very much. And indeed, that's as urgent as it is. I will ask this question, but then let me know if it's something that you can reply to. In terms of timeline, indeed, you said indeed that there is the urgency of making pressure. But then for the whole appealing system and procedure, we know that oftentimes these processes might take even longer time, especially for the current courts that you are addressing. So how do you see this foreseeing? Is that some ways that we can, make pressure on specific timings in specific moments in the next months, or is something that we can, keep up with you and see how it evolves?
Yeah, I mean, meanwhile, the petition is scheduled for a first hearing in January 2027. That's like 6 months from now. And we usually, in these cases, where principles of international law are highly applicable, international interest and international human rights principles are applicable, and there's a huge interest. We try to convince international organizations, stakeholders, leaders to keep up the pace. Like in our petition, there's a whole section about international criticism against the law during the enactment and after. It was right after that, because we filed a few hours after it was enacted in the Knesset. And we will keep updating the court because it is a very important consideration for two reasons. One, that the applicability of the law on an occupied territory, which is an international of international concern. Also, when it applies to Israel, we're talking about an international consensus among most UN member states that no state should execute anyone. And the trend is against abolition. And in fact, Israel, for a long time, has declared in the UN on different occasions that they are for abolishing the death penalty, except for the last 2 years when they attempted and eventually enacted the law. So the more, the faster, the prolonged pressure is better. Yes, in any way possible.
Thank you very much. I will now go to the questions we have received. There is Ria that actually makes a question, a very specific one. Do you think they will use it against the medical people in prison in Gaza, for example, for Dr. Abu Safia? Is there any possibility that this relates also to this specific case and especially to the medical staff in general?
Yeah, I mean, the death penalty law itself does not apply retroactively It will apply only to events that potentially can occur after its enactment. Otherwise, it can't apply. However, some of the prisoners from Gaza could be indicted under the special tribunal law and might face death penalty. The law, as it is phrased right now, it is intended to indict suspects who took part in the October 7th attack. I don't think it would be easy to argue that against medical personnel that are imprisoned in Israeli prisons. So it would be a harder case to prove under the special tribunal's law.
Thank you very much. I'm also taking notes, so I'm sorry if I'm taking a few seconds after you speak. Then another question we stay for now within the theme of the court. So we have Maggie that is asking, do you have confidence that the Supreme Court is truly independent from the Knesset?
Well, this is a question that I can speak about for hours. I cannot say that the court is completely independent. And in fact, since October 7th, no one single petition that was brought before the Supreme Court on behalf of the rights of Palestinians, including humanitarian aid to Gaza, including the torture and starvation in Israeli prisons, including holding bodies for purposes of negotiations, including bodies of Palestinian citizens and from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. All of these, with no exception, were denied. And this goes back to a long history of the Supreme Court. I'm not saying that there were not cases that human rights principles were upheld. Yeah, I mean, there were some cases where, organizations won and petitions were accepted. However, generally speaking, when it comes to the Palestinians and the West Bank, and to a great extent also in relation to the rights of Palestinians in Israel, but this is another conversation, the court is less and less reluctant to intervene in any considerations or decisions made by the political or executive parts of the state, the government, laws, and so on and so on. We still believe that there are very good legal grounds to claim against the constitutionality of the death penalty law and its violation of international human rights and humanitarian law. I don't think, I'm not I'm not naive, but I would like to believe that there is a chance. There must be a way. Israel cannot just start executing people and the judicial system say, sorry, I cannot do anything about it, yeah. But we'll take it step by step, we'll see.
Thank you. I think hope is actually what takes us all together right now, and the fact that we are still here thinking about this and keeping up, let's say, although the time is becoming quite pressuring and oftentimes overwhelming, but we cannot lose that aspect if you really want to wish and see a justice happening. We have one last question. It's from Marian, and it's about what provision is there to inform the public in Israel and international society when such an execution has taken place, or indeed advance notice of an execution with the names of victims. Is it possible to use such mechanism to campaign? This is
Yeah, I mean, according to the law, all of the execution system is quite closed. I mean, no family members, very restricted group of personnel, usually officials, will be allowed visitation and so on and so on. However, I do believe that once such a verdict is given, people will know. Usually you have lawyers, media monitoring. Once such an indictment is filed, it's public. So if we're talking about the death penalty law, my assumption is that we will know. We will be also monitoring because once we know of such a case, we will go back to the Supreme Court asking for an interim injunction to freeze the implementation of the law until the court decides on the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of the law. I mean, and the idea basically that you cannot execute someone when the constitutionality of the law is under examination.
Yeah, under the scrutiny, yes, indeed. Well, a small information for all of you that are following. If you have the chance and the time, I strongly suggest to do so. If you are here today, means that you care and you want to follow on this, to go and check also the website of Adalah and the various communication channels they have. In there, you will find also the translations text where possible. So if you, of course, want to have the possibility to have a bit more on the legal analysis of the text as well, that there is this opportunity. There are also a document of analysis that they have redacted jointly with other organizations, and they go very much in detail with everything that Dr. Suhad actually presented to us today. And of course, they are also, I believe, available in case you have any question on any ideas, of course, of interaction to support. But I really strongly suggest to have a look at it. We will also share those materials with a follow-up email, so in case you can also go back to those whenever you need to. For now, Dr. Suhad, thank you very much. Truly, you gave us with the short amount of time that you had available for the webinar, a very good analysis and in-depth understanding on what's actually happening. We will stay, of course, united in the effort. We will continue the collaboration, but also we ask to all of you to stay tuned because we will try also to engage with some public campaign, with some active action in order to be all mobilized for the rights of the Palestinian people to be actually respected and then also, of course, implemented. So thank you very much, Dr. Suhad, and we will stay in touch. Please stay with us for this next session. I will now move to the second part of our webinar. And it's the last part and the ending part, although it's the ending part is still very relevant. As I was mentioning before at the beginning of the session, we have indeed launched a call when the bill was actually announced, when it reached the news at least, although we know it was still on the process for quite a long time. We launched this call open to Catholic leaders and Catholic organizations to actually speak up against this, and we will manage indeed to gather a very big support. And the call now is open again for any Catholic leader and Catholic organization that wishes to join. We are trying to gather as many possible people in order to really make the pressure there and visible. And I would like indeed to invite you all. My colleague now will put in the chat the link to this call, to actually look at it and share where possible. And indeed, if you are a Catholic leader or you represent legally a Catholic organization, to please endorse this call and take part in the effort. We will also continue to engage with you once you have signed in order to propose your activities and action to do jointly together. Now I will go to introducing our next three speakers. They will have a few minutes each to actually share with us their reflection on what we have actually discussed until now, and what's also the aim of this meeting. And I will now introduce the first one. So we have here with us, and I will add you with me in the room, Archbishop John Wester of Santa Fe, who is the 2026 recipient of the Pax Christi USA Teacher of Peace Award. Ian has been the Archbishop of Santa Fe since 2015. He previously served as Bishop of Salt Lake City from 2007 to 2015 and as an auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of San Francisco from 1998 to 2007. He has been a strong advocate against the death penalty and for nuclear disarmament, and published the pastoral letter Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a conversation toward nuclear disarmament in 2022. Archbishop Wester, thank you for joining us and for sharing also your reflection, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'm very grateful to you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And it's an honor to be with you all. And thank you, Dr. Suhad, for that beautiful and wonderful and very helpful talk you gave. It's an honor also for me to be with His Beatitude, Michel Saba. I had the honor of meeting him in San Francisco about 40 years ago with Archbishop Quinn. And so it's a great honor to see you again, Your Beatitude, and what a grace it is to be with all of you. I approach my few minutes here of reflection on what would I say to one of our parishioners here in New Mexico, United States, if they were to ask about this law. What would I say, especially if they're conscious of what happened on October 7th, and they would say, well, isn't this justice? And I would try to begin my remarks by saying that, of course, the church cares about everybody. As Dr. said so beautifully, the gift of human life is precious and unrepeatable. And so whether one is looking at Israel or Gaza, Ukraine or Russia, the Sudanese armed forces or the rapid support forces, the church cares about everybody, all people. And the church advocates, as Pope Leo has made clear, for diplomacy and dialogue, for peace and for reconciliation. Regarding the law that we're talking about today on this webinar, the Catholic Church is certainly very clear that the death penalty is wrong, and that today in our societies, there's just no excuse for it. I live in New Mexico, where we abolished the death penalty in 2010. And I also remember when I was bishop in Salt Lake City, we had a press conference to speak against the death penalty in Utah. And there's one woman, she was almost 100 years old. And after we religious leaders gave our talks to the press, she came up to me and said, "Can I have a word, Reverend?" And I said, "Well, of course. What would you like to say?" And she looked at the camera, imagine that, 99 years old, and she said, "The scriptures say thou shalt not kill. What do you not understand about that?" And I said to myself, well, there, I wish she had went first. We keep inventing moral excuses to get around that basic fact. Life is a gift from God, and it is blasphemous for us to think that we are on a par with God and can take life at our discretion. There are many arguments against the death penalty in itself, of course, but that's not particularly what this webinar is about. We're talking about the expansion of the death penalty to apply exclusively to Palestinians. It reminds me of when the disciples asked Jesus if they could call down fire from heaven against the Samaritans. And Jesus' response was quick and unequivocal. He rebuked them, and they journeyed to another village. Our response to the proposed death penalty for terrorist law passed by the Knesset on March 30th, 2026, is also quick and unequivocal. It should be struck down by Israeli Supreme Court. Catholic social teaching speaks of the common good. Laws are to be applied equally to all for the good of all, for the good of society. The death penalty for terrorist law applies only to Palestinians and not to Israelis guilty of the same offense. This is discriminatory, creating a two-tiered system that smacks of political retaliation. Only love, compassion, and forgiveness can stop the violence, not more violence. This law enshrines bigotry and prejudice, it seems to me. treating an entire group of people unfairly because of the actions of some. And the Catholic Church has always prioritized care for the poor. The Church holds a preferential option for the poor, and this includes those who are oppressed, who are living in conflict and in violent situations. The law at hand unfairly attacks those who are oppressed and who are clearly the poorest of the poor. And the Church also would be against this law, from my view, because of a concern for due process, which Doctor brought out so clearly. Since there are inconsistent legal standards in this law, one standard for Israelis and another for Palestinians, one wonders what kind of due process Palestinians would receive. Do they have access to adequate legal representation? And does the law even allow a lawyer to make a case when the law has already predetermined the penalty for the crime? And what would be the political pressure applied in the sentencing procedure? And does due process have a chance when the law stipulates that the death sentence by hanging must be carried out within 90 days with no clemency allowed? Also, the Church advocates for a lessening of conflict and violence, not escalating it. In a context where violence is the order of the day, this law only adds to the violence and inevitably will lead to more violence. Someone must end this vicious cycle, and the government of Israel is in a position to bring about understanding and peace rather than more violence. And also, the Church seeks to lessen divisions, not harden them. This law creates new animosity and hardens hatred. It weakens the prospects of the two-state solution by increasing hatred and a feeling of being victimized. It also increases radicalization, as loved ones who see their family members killed are more likely to seek revenge than pursue peace. The law does not promote efforts to bring about lasting peace, but only inflames existing animosities. Martin Luther King famously said that only love can drive out hate. We human beings keep resorting to violence, military might, the death penalty, and do all we can to water down Jesus' command to love one another. Teilhard de Chardin said it eloquently when he said that when human beings master love, for a second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. The death penalty for terrorist law is not helping us to stoke that fire of love. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much indeed, and for the deep reflection and for making the connection between the gospel as well, that is calling us to act and to not stay quiet and to really go out there for the oppressed. So thank you very much, and I hope we will also have the possibility to have that beautiful reflection in writing. So we will continue to share it further with also those that are not with us today. Thank you very much. I will now welcome Bishop Peter Cullinan. So Bishop Peter Cullinan was the first bishop of the Diocese of Palmerston North, created in 1980. And after many years of service, he retired in 2012, but remains an active diocese member. He's a respected writer and leader of retreats, who is in retirement, is still busy at local, national, and international levels. He completed a licentiate in sacred theology at the Angelicum in Rome in 1964 and a master's in theology in Otago in 1980. He served as president of the New Zealand Catholic Bishop Conference between 1970 and 2003, and as a member of the Episcopal Board of the International Commission on English on the Liturgy between 1983 and 2003. And in the 1990, he was awarded New Zealand 1990 Commemoration Medal. And in the 2006 New Year Honors, he was appointed a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to the community.
And ladies and gentlemen, we have gratefully listened to expert comment on legal aspects of recent legislation promoting the death penalty for Palestinian prisoners. But any evaluation of real situations on the ground requires more than careful analysis of legislation. It requires us to pay close attention to the underlying culture that would express itself in legislation like that, the attitudes and the agendas underneath. That's why this webinar does well to combine concern over that legislation with the wider concern to protect Palestinian life under occupation. Israel's right to defend itself is not in question, but obstructing medical supplies and blocking the evacuation of sick people in need of urgent medical help, and the targeting of paramedics, journalists, and children looking for food, the displacement of populations and official recognition of the settlements, to say nothing of mockery of Palestinians by Israeli soldiers, it's all on film, go well beyond the requirements of self-defense. They reveal a militaristic, racist, and power-based culture, even if that description applies only to part of a population. Nevertheless, a culture that can only be deeply troubling to all who hope for a future that is respectful of human dignity and human rights of both peoples. Both stand to lose. Which brings me to another cultural distortion, namely the creeping acceptance of a move away from rule-based international order to rule by power. The imposition of the death penalty on a weaker power without adequate due process is a further symptom of that movement towards power-based subjugation, replacing rule-based order. I respectfully suggest that other nations of the Western world need to consider whether their failure to impose significant sanctions on those who have been violating international and humanitarian law with impunity equates to anti-Semitism. Neither Israel nor the rest of the world need anti-Semitism. And for that same reason, no one needs the atrocities which bring about an upsurge of anti-Semitism. History clearly shows that empires based on the rule of power ultimately self-degrade, because that way of living doesn't match what it means to be authentically human. There is simply no substitute for an ethic based ultimately on the meaning, dignity, and destiny of human nature. That belongs to the givenness of being human. But it's also a task, a calling to work together in respectful dialogue to make all of human life more authentically human. And that in turn, ladies and gentlemen, can only come out of a radically different culture. And it's the one that has been beautifully described by Pope Benedict XVI, and I quote, he says, on the one hand, charity demands justice, recognition and respect for the legitimate rights of individuals and peoples. It strives to build the earthly city according to law and justice. On the other hand, charity also transcends justice and completes it in the logic of giving and forgiving. The earthly city is promoted not merely by relationships of rights and duties, but to an even greater and more fundamental extent by relationships of gratuitousness, mercy, and communion. End of quote. Hopefully, the God-given dignity of every person, which no circumstances and no personal wrongdoing can ever cancel, may still be common ground enough for us always to give that way of living another try. Thank you.
And the bishop is also one of the signatories of the call that we launched. So his support has been unwavering since the beginning of this call that was launched. And we hope that we will continue to work together and to collaborate together. Hopefully next time we will manage to fix this audio issue. Thank you very much indeed for your patience, especially. I will then now go to introduce Father Luis Fernando Monera Congote, who holds a degree in philosophy from the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, a bachelor degree in theology, and a doctorate in philosophy from the Centre Sèvres in Paris. He was Dean of the Faculty of Political Science and International Relations, advisor to the academic vice rector, and a co-director of the University Planning Program on Peace and Reconciliation. He also served as associate professor of the Faculty of Philosophy at the Javeriana, where he held the position of career director. He also worked in social formation and coordinated the specialization in ethics and values, where he also served as professor of ethics, politics, and philosophy. And between 2001 and 2003, he was executive director of the peace program of the Society of Jesus in Colombia and has worked in the formation of Jesuits in the country. Father Luis, thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your reflection. The floor is.
Thank you very much for the invitation first. For me, has been a very interesting experience to listen you about this situation in Israel and Palestinian and Palestina with the Palestinian people. For us in Colombia, it's a difficult situation, it's a difficult position because our government had been involved, the last government and the new government, in the discussion about the relation with Israel. And we need to have the differentiation between Israeli people and Israeli government, because we can't attack Israeli people itself. But the Israeli government is doing some abuse of authority with the Palestinians. It's very clear for us. I have prepared a little exposition about death penalty and the position of the church, but I think it's no more relevant. But we need to say that for the official teaching of Catholic Church, the death penalty is inadmissible because it's an attack upon the inviolability and dignity of the person. Then death penalty itself is inadmissible. Now, we have been listening and be awareness about the situation of this new law in Israel that is discriminatory and will cause more and more anger and more violence. Here in Colombia, we try to work in democracy, in peace building, in dialogues, one again and again and again, and we have cycles of violence that come back again. And we are convinced that the word, that the reason, that the democracy and dialogue with the other is the only way to finish that violence. But now it's difficult to talk about that. We are reflecting about how to speak about peace, peace building, and reconciliation in a new way in order to be listened by people. But even the term peace is politicized now in Colombia, and it's difficult to talk about peace with freedom in this country. We need to give a new sense to peace building, to reconciliation, but we need to continue to speak about that because of the suffering of people. Now, I think we need to think about people with names, people who are suffering of these situations, of this law, of this discrimination and injustice. Then this conversation certainly is about death penalty, but it's more than death penalty. It's a conversation about discrimination, about violence, about rights of people, about fear as instrument of politics, about the political position of different countries and the role of the force in the international relations. We have a lot of problems now with the system, multilateral system of law, of justice, of relation in the countries, because force and violence should not be the only way to have relation between people and between countries. And now I agree with you. We need to continue working on this way, on the way of democracy, the way of reason, the way of words. Sometimes you feel a little bit upset and depressed because you continue working against a big forces. But I think it's the only way as a Christian, as a Catholic, to build a world, a reign of God, is to continue believing on the gospel, on the values, on the humanity. We need to say people that we need to protect humanity, we need to protect justice, we need to protect people and people with names in this world, new world that we need to live in. We need to learn how to do our political action in this world that we have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think you coming last, you were able also to grasp a bit what went through also between all the presentation that we heard today. And indeed, the matter of remaining hopeful, remain courageous, I believe. In case, of course, we are Catholic, those that are Catholic, to follow the example of Jesus, but also who are not. I mean, it's historically speaking, is still a good example to follow. So to be courageous, to stand in the truth, to support justice, and we saw that indeed we need to remain strength in the strength of being together in this world, and especially the fact that oftentimes we might be nowadays probably blind because of fear, because of the violence that is always announced and underlined, and we'll risk to lose a bit the sight of what's good. And the good is actually, of course, relating with one another, connecting with one another as human beings. So thank you very much, Father Luis. I will now put all of us together. Yes, here we are. For leaving Martinez doing her final conclusion. Now, before giving the word to Martinez, I just want to share with everyone that the chat is supposedly be open again, if I'm not wrong, for all of you to share any words of thanks, any remarks, any message that you wish to share. And also a reminder for you all that you will also receive a follow-up email, not very soon, probably next week, where we will include also Bishop Peter speech, but also the materials from all the speakers of today, and ways for you to follow up, stay active, join campaigns, and continue the effort for speaking up against this law. Martinez, the floor is.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Alessio, for all your support. Thank you, His Beatitude, the Archbishop Western, Bishop Peter, and Father Luis Fernando, and of course, Dr. Suhad. Your very courageous work in Israel. It's a lot for all of us to continue in supporting, in solidarity with you all. I took some ideas from your presentations, and I'm going to present that with two big questions. First, it is, and how can we understand a law that dehumanizes human beings? And second, how can we confront it from a nonviolent and faith citizenry? Because this is not only reflection, it is move to action. Kairos to ask the Palestinian people to act in solidarity, although it could be costly for us. We need to continue in working in solidarity with those who was suffering injustice in the Holy Land. A brief conclusion. So first, the issue of justice for Palestinians. So coexist in a secure environment, living without fear. It is what Palestinians are asking, are demanding, the right to exist in their own land, from their own culture, with their sumud, the strong capacity to resist and to live, although this very out of control violence. And then the conclusion, but just peace is the only way. Then some reflections about the legal system, that it is not legitimate, not respecting human dignity. So the issue related to the law that comes from the coalition amongst Israeli and current government. So it is the coalition who is very strong. That the law is ineffective because there is no conclusive evidence that capital punishment deters crime more effectively than life imprisonment sentences. And then there is a negation of the right to life. So there is a racial approach on it, and then consequences. There's a lot of concerns about the short time for the processes, the issue related to the families not to get access to the process, very weak evidences to apply this law, and of course the issue of the military tribunals confronting with the situation of Jews accused by crimes, that they will be directly to non-military tribunals. And the issue related to the Knesset not legally allowed to work or to have an impact on the West Bank. And the violation of humanitarian and human rights international laws. That it is very important because although in fact, de facto, it has been imposed the death penalty, we need to continue in that it has been remarked by some of you related to the diplomacy for peace. In terms of the faith leaders and organizations, we have heard the church cares of all people. So the death penalty is wrong. It is inadmissible. The relevance of diplomacy for peace, for faith organizations and churches in a context of a crisis of the multilateralism, but we should continue in many of these scenarios to advocate for this. It's important to continue the conversation about death penalty, but also about discrimination, about human rights abuses, about genocide, about crimes against humanity. Of course, we come back to the center of the Jesus, the nonviolent Jesus, and the preparation option for the poor coming from the Council Vatican II. We need to continue talking about peace, reconciliation. It's a huge work by faith organizations in supporting trauma healing all the time, not after. And we were dreaming with this after this tragedy, this nightmare will end. And of course, the only way to confront violence, it is nonviolence. And there are some fair alternatives. So when we are promoting the abolition, it is not that we are promoting impunity. So defending abolition does not mean impunity. It means opting for proportional, safe, and rehabilitative punishment in general. Of course, related to the Palestinians is related to the right to defend their culture, their land, their history, their background, their dreams, their future. So in terms of how can we act, in terms of advocacy, it should continue at many levels, at the UN level, at the European level, at the US level, with all the implications that the U.S. administration's policy has an impact in the people in the Holy Land. Very important to continue supporting the internal advocacy for legal reforms, as Dr. has said, to monitoring and updating the Supreme Court without a naive position, but very clever on this, the issue of we have to do the right thing. And of course, we will continue in mobilization at many levels, in confronting, in posing to the media many of these injustices, and to promoting the right way to live in peace, as His Beatitude has said, for just peace in the Holy Land. And I will close with this beautiful quotation by Dr. Martin Luther King, that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. So hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So thank you for this, and let's continue with the conversation. There are many other questions and comments by our participants, of course, a reply by our guests today.
Thank you very much, and please stay in contact with all of us. Thank you again to all the speakers for accepting the invitation and for continuing to walk all together. A long journey, but we will continue. Thank you very much. Bye.